All right, what's up, my friends? Welcome. Alchemy Rebalance Day. This is the exciting part of the Alchemy format, kind of a make or break moment. Alchemy, of course, is a new format on Arena, which is basically standard plus digital only cards. A very, very live format. And the goal is to be very, very active in the curation of the format. So, taking cards, turning the knobs up, turning the knobs down, much more like a standard online game, where cards will be nerfed, cards will be buffed, like you see in StarCraft. The battle cruiser is too good, turn it down, give it 10 less hit points, whatever. So having that ability is really, really cool. Impossible in paper, but available in Alchemy. And this is the first major rebalance beyond the initial release of Alchemy. So we're going to see cards here nerfed, cards here buffed. And this is going to be a really, really important one to know what the future of Alchemy is going to be. So there's all your text. You can read that yourself. I'll link it in the description. Let's jump right into card buffs. So we're going to do buffs first. First buff is going to be to Astraric the Archlich. So this was a 3 mana 5/5. Remove the opponent's option to sacrifice a creature on the attack trigger. So whenever attacks, create a number of black 2/2 zombie tokens equal to the number of opponents that you have. Sure. I mean, it doesn't really matter in online, I guess, but just whatever. So whenever you attack, it makes it 2/2. Okay. So very, very slight buff. There's a lot of buffs to these dungeon cards here. I think they're trying to really say, hey, we screwed up the dungeon mechanic. It wasn't good enough. And I think this honestly kind of makes sense because in paper, the dungeon mechanic's a little hard to track. I don't think I'd want to see it in every format going crazy, but it's much easier to track on Arena, so it makes sense to buff it up a little bit. So, little buff here, just on the attack trigger. Next up is Assemble from Parts. This is one of the Alchemy cards. Cool card here, 1 black instant, and creature graver perpetually gains black 1. Exile it, make a 4/4. This cost has been lowered from 4. So now we have a reanimation spell that could, in theory, be played on turn 3 in standard. Reanimating creature. It is a 4/4, but still the exact creature that it is. So a little buff here to the reanimation card. Pretty cool. Card's kind of sweet. Hasn't seen much play yet. So they're turning it up. I don't think I've seen this card see play yet in Alchemy. So they're saying, hey, it's a cool card. Let's turn up the knob and see how it works. Cool. Up next is Blood Rage Alpha, another Alchemy card seeing a buff here. Going up to a 4/4 from a 4/3. So again, just tuning that knob a little bit. This is a 4 mana, now 4/4. When it comes into play, at ETBs, a werewolf you control fights a creature you don't control, or whenever you cast your next wolf or werewolf spell, same idea. So just a little buff here to a 4-drop wolf. We'll see how this one goes. Just an interesting one. Up next, we see this is some changes to the dungeon cards that I was saying. They changed a lot of the dungeon cards, try and buff them up and make dungeons a more playable mechanic in Constructed. First up is Cloister Gargoyle, and this is a huge change. So it is now a 2 mana 0/3 rather than a 3 mana 0/4, which is huge because having your enabler card cost 2 instead of 3 is huge. When you complete a dungeon, it's now a 3/3 flyer for 2, which is awesome. This is a huge change because honestly, I played dungeon decks on my early set release, deck builds and stuff like that. And I played this card as like a 2 or a 3 of it. It's really not that bad to buy. It buys sometimes you finish a dungeon, it gets the adventure going, and then it's a reasonable threat also. So this is a pretty big one here. I think I watch out for this card. At 2 mana, this card looks pretty impressive for a dungeon deck. Up next is Dungeon Descent. And this is one of the worst dungeon cards. Very, very embarrassing card. This came into play tapped and activated for 4 mana. They've removed both of those downsides, cutting the activation cost down from 4 to 1. So huge buff here. This card goes from being a literal joke to probably very good, honestly. The art's really cool, too. So it's Carlos Santa comes in untapped, so very low opportunity cost. And you can pay 1 and tap an untapped legendary creature you control to venture. Only as a sorcery. But this is a repeatable venture effect on a land, which is very, very powerful. And I think it was definitely costed as such to start. This card comes into play tapped and costs 4 for a reason because it's a very powerful effect. This is going to be a big one, I think. If it's going to be a dungeon deck, this card's going to be a centerpiece to it. Looks like a very, very powerful card to me. We'll see. Also, Eliwick Troublesome, another buff here for a dungeon card. 4 mana Planeswalker. Now the ultimate ability is now -6 rather than -7. Just a little bit of a buff here. Very, very slight, honestly, being that the ultimates don't necessarily matter too much for Planeswalkers, but very slight buff to the Adventure Planeswalker. Up next is Fate's Reversal, and honestly a pretty big one here. So this is a Raise Dead that also adventures, and at 2 mana, not even close to playable Constructed, but at 1 mana, a little more reasonable, but Raise Dead is still a pretty mopey card for Constructed. Just not necessarily a great card by itself. You just play another threat. Why play Raise Dead, But The cost here is cheap. Definitely 1 mana spells do have a pretty low bar, but I don't think it's necessarily good enough. Up next is Find the Path. This is a land augmenter that also ventures. Used to make it tap for 2 green, now it taps for 2 of any color. So a little bit of a buff here as far as mana fixing, but 3 mana ramp spell is not necessarily amazing, but it is a lot better now as far as fixing your mana. There's going to be like a 3-color venture deck or something like that. Could be a possibility, but again, not really a huge buff, but a buff nonetheless. Up next is Puppet-razer. This is another one of the Alchemy cards that hasn't really seen much play. This was a 3/3, now it's a 3/4. 4 mana for beginning of your end step. Exile up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard. If you do seek a creature card with mana value equal to the mana value of the card +1, and it gains menace. So kind of like a weird graveyard birthing pod card. This card feels like it's too many hoops to jump through, and the rate being a hill giant was already too bad. Now it's 3/4. I don't think it's good enough yet, but it's still an interesting little tweak to the card. This is a big one here, Precipitous Drop. This is another dungeon card. Again, going from 3 to 2 is a huge change. Like, huge monumental change. And now this is 2 mana for a -2/-2 removal spell. -5/-5, you can put it in a dungeon. Again, if there's going to be some sort of dungeon deck, this is going to be a major player. Major player. Not that hard to finish a dungeon. And then 2 mana for -5/-5 is awesome. It's a cheap spell. It's an enabler. I think this is a big change. You can see there's going to be a dungeon deck. Like, they fixed too many cards for there not to be. And the next one here is a huge one as well. Triumphant Adventurer. This card was playable. I mean, I've seen this card in play in Standard and in Alchemy a little bit, but mostly in Standard. And this card is a reasonable card at a 1/1. Now it's a 2/1. So a 2/1 Death Touch that is very hard to block, and then adventures every single turn. This card's good. This card was already like just about there, and now it's a 2/1. 2/1 first striking attacker. Very good. Very good. Very hard to block now also. So this is a huge one. So those are all the buffs, all right? And the buffs are a little weirder than the nerfs because the nerfs are obvious, right? This card is too good. Let's take it down a notch. But the problem is in Magic, it isn't, a flat line in power level. It's always a bell curve. The curve that goes up, there's the cards that are really bad, and then there are the cards that are, fine, and there are the cards that are a little too good, right? So it's easy to nerf this side of the bell curve because it's very obvious what cards are too good, but once you go down a bit, there are always other cards that could be better. So deciding what to buff is definitely a difficult question. Deciding what to nerf is a little less difficult. So first one here is Divide by Zero. Now we saw this card banned in Standard. If you missed the ban video, go watch that one. But in Alchemy, they don't gotta ban cards. They can just edit them and change them, which is really cool. So Divide by Zero has been changed to now it'll only learn if you return a spell or permanent that's mana value is 4 or less. So you want to hit their Goldspan Dragon, you don't get to learn. This card is terrible if you don't learn. Pretty bad. Pretty bad. It's a much worse Unsubstantiate, which is a card that's already not very good. So cutting down the ability of this card to really hurt you for playing 5-drops and 6-drops, which is nice, honestly, which is a nice change. Not a huge change, though, because obviously most of the cards in the format do cost 4 or less, but a change nonetheless. So we'll see how this one plays out. Taking a little bit of the spice out of Divide by Zero as a nerf. Next nerf here is to Fearsome Whelp. And definitely, the Dragon decks I don't think are necessarily too good in Alchemy. However, the starts they're capable of having are ridiculous. And Fearsome Whelp is a huge part of that. So we see a change here. The trigger now triggers on the upkeep, not the end step. And the hard part about Fearsome Whelp was you'd play Fearsome Whelp, or your opponent would play it, and you'd be tapped out on turn 2. And they would immediately get the trigger, and there was no way to stay. You had no window of opportunity to stop them from doing it, unless you left mana up for removal on their turn, which isn't always easy to do when you're playing your own things. So basically, just couldn't stop it. Now it's changed to be an upkeep trigger. So now you can untap, go to your turn, you can kill it. This makes the card much worse, to the point where it might not even be playable anymore. Honestly, that's kind of the difficult part of the buffs and the nerfs is that you're trying to find this flat power level. If you nerf the card too much, it's unplayable. But where's that sweet spot where it's still playable, but not too good anymore? I think it makes this card a lot worse. At this point, I think you'd rather just play a removal spell and just cast your dragon on turn 4 rather than turn 3. Because this card is now a liability. This also makes removal spells that aren't necessarily good against dragons. Things like, Play with Fire or Braid, actually good now because you can just kill their Fearsome before they can use it. So I think this is a major nerf. If you're a Dragons player, I would consider not playing this card and just playing more removal spells and interaction and just planning on playing your Dragons on curve and from there, or just play Orb of Dragonkind as well. So big change. Big change. Next change here is to Hullbreaker Horror and removing the can't be countered clause. Now, I completely misevaluated this card in my set review. Completely. I saw it as a Pearl Lake Ancient or a Nezahal the Primal Tide. You know, just your dumb, all right, here's your 7 mana can't be countered win condition for your control mirrors. You know, whatever. Okay, sure, not very good otherwise. Hullbreaker Horror is insane in spite of the can't be countered text. Just an insanely powerful card. However, countering it is one of the only clean ways to deal with it because it's so easy to play it and have it protect itself. Where you play it, they go to kill it, you cast a spell and bounce it back to your hand and cast it again. So taking off the can't be counter clause is huge here. I think this is a major fair change to this card. Now a disable stroke can counter it or whatever else can counter it. And this makes this card much more fair and reasonable and manageable. Still very powerful. It still has flash, so you can still sneak it around counter spells and stuff like that, but requires some counterplay at least. You can't just blow up. There you go. Here it is. I have mana up. I can protect it too. So that's a huge one. And I agree with their assertion here, but like it's already Lier and Hermit as far as making things not be able to be countered. So I like that. Pretty cool. Big one here, folks. Inquisitor Captain is now only on cast. It's not a cast trigger, but it will only trigger if you cast it. So this is huge. This is a nerf that I actually called for. Because I think this card is super cool played fairly. It's basically just Bloodbraid Elf when played fairly, where it's a 3/3, you get some card advantage, it's a pretty cool card, helps you find your creatures, you know, but the problem is people were ephemerating this card, they were soul herdering this card, and the most obnoxious one in Standard was with Glasspool Mimic, which they could go find. If you high rolled, you could copy it, get another Mimic, copy it, get another Mimic, and it was just like a sick high roll, like, you know, variance thing. And the people are playing, you know, Mimic in their non-blue decks, basically with Captain, just to try and copy more copies of it. So I love this change. The card is totally playable without the ability to abuse it. And I love this as a fair tool for white decks. It's not just a stupid engine anymore. Love this change. Perhaps my favorite change of all the nerfs. Up next is Lier, Disciple of a Drowned. And the big thing about Lier is that whenever you see a card like this, another card that I missed in my set review, because whenever you see a card like this, it always has some sort of safety valve on the ability. You can only cast one spell a turn. You can only do, you know, whatever it is. And this had none. No safety valve. Once you untap with Lier, you basically just drew 8 cards and can't lose the game. So Lier is at least being changed to only on your turn. And this is huge because now Lier can't protect itself. So your problem with Lier was your opponent would play a Lier. They'd have 1 mana up for Fading Hope and just say go. And if you tried to play a big creature and attack, they could Fading Hope it. And if you tried to kill the Lier, they would Fading Hope it and bounce it and have it again next turn. So this turns off, turns on a lot of the counterplay to Lier that was being turned off by these play patterns. So this is a great change. Lier is still going to be really good, but now you can actually interact with your opponent when they play it, which is actually huge. So I'll just keep saying actually over and over again. That was loud. So I think great change, great change. I like it a lot. Still a good card, but now more counterplay available. Up next is Sanguine Brushstroke, black 1 enchantment that makes a Blood Artist, and they're changing it from the blood trigger token will no longer gain life. So very small change here. The main part of this card is to find to get a Blood Artist token conjured onto the battlefield. The blood thing was definitely secondary, but now it makes it so your opponent only loses life on the blood, you don't gain life. This is a very small change, but it's a minimal impact. The black decks are really good against the creature decks, like really good, between Medoc Massacre and a bunch of blockers, Shambling Ghast, etc. It can be hard for the aggro decks to break through. So this is like the tiniest of nerfs here. This really is like maybe, you know, a 1 life point a game kind of nerf. So very small nerf, but fine. I think this card is pretty good still, and then it turns the knob down a little bit against the aggro deck, so I'm cool with this. Town-razer Tyrant, this is the big one here. One of the best cards in the format, Town-razer Tyrant. The most important thing here, they capitalize the goddamn R. They did it. They capitalized the R. Whew. Thank God. But there's actually a nerf on here as well. They have changed the ability. Now it can only target non-basic lands. I got news for you, folks. This basically doesn't change anything. Unless your opponent is playing literally, 20 planes in their deck, you're going to have a target for this. Obviously, the most popular target is creature lands, but basically every deck, this is a very, very small change. Very, very small change. So it mentions here in the comments that maybe they can, they can have their mana not targeted. That's not the power of Town-razer. The power of Town-razer is the damage and then killing the actual land. So Town-razer Tyrant emerges almost completely unscathed, which might be bad news for you. It's good news in my Rakdos deck I want to beat you with on Sunday. If you missed that, go watch the YouTube video on it. Go to my matches. But the card is still as good as ever. This is the most minuscule change they could have made to this card. Could have made it a 3/3. Could have made it on, if it goes away, the land thing goes away. Could have made it 1 damage. Could have made a ton of changes to this card. They went with the tiniest route here, and we'll see if it still feels oppressive. Next up is a slight change to Historic. So that's all the Alchemy changes, right? But it's important to note that Historic is also a live format. The point of Historic and Alchemy are to be the arena formats. You can't play Historic in paper. That was true before, even more true once they added the digital-only cards, and they're willing to take this balance adjustment thing to Historic as well. I know some people don't like this. I think you're wrong. I think that the balancing thing, the frustrating part of having your standard cards change Historic is a little frustrating. Lunarch Aspirant being the worst offender, a card that got nerfed in standard, didn't really need to be nerfed in Historic. I get that. That's a very legal gripe. But I think the ability to change the cards in Historic is awesome. We see here Teferi has been bumped up to a 4-mana Planeswalker with 5 loyalty. And the static ability has changed from the oppressive, your opponent can't cast spells, whatever, kind of thing. So now it turns off promise of, whatever the hell it's called. I forgot what it's called. The red card that brings back 2 spells in the graveyard. Dreadhorde Arcanist, Suspend, whatever. All the things that it turns off incidentally are no longer turned off, which is a major, major fix to the card. But the essence of your opponents can't interact on your turn is still preserved. That's kind of cool. As a 4-mana Planeswalker, is this card good enough in Historic? I don't really think so. That's kind of the problem with the nerfs, is like finding that sweet spot where it's like just a little worse, but not too much worse. I think for Town-razer Tyrant, they probably swung a little low. And I think for Teferi, they probably swung a little high. So for Teferi is like probably not really playable anymore. We'll see though. Whereas Town-razer is the exact same card. They haven't changed anything basically. So big change for Historic. We'll see how that one goes. And Finale, I promise. That's what I was looking for. So, and that's all the changes. So huge change here. And again, I really like this sort of live aspect. I really like the ability of using digital platform. I know there's a lot of pro clutching about this. A lot of people, oh my God, you can't. This is Hearthstone now. Like, I think that using the digital platform and being able to change cards is exactly what Magic would do if they had the ability to do that in paper, but they can't. Teferi is printed. It's done. It's over with. There's no way to fix it besides banning it. So I love a lot of his stuff. I think the buffing is cool. I wish the buffs were a little more widespread. It seemed very, very clear that their buffs this time around were only focused towards dungeon cards. I would have loved to have seen Base Camp come in untapped. Like, and some pretty more obvious ones like that. I don't like this buff only based around one mechanic. I'd love to see it around multiple things, but I also get the idea of not wanting to change between things at once and not knowing what's going to break or not break. So that's all the changes again. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. If you missed the band video, go watch that one. Again, my name is Jim Davis. First time you hit that like button, comment, subscribe. Let me hear your thoughts on Alchemy changes. What do you think of this first rebalance for Alchemy? First time, which has ever done this before? And how they do? What do you think in the comments? All right. Again, like, comment, subscribe. I'm Jim, and I'll see you next time. Neon Dynasty's coming up. Bronze Mythic's coming up. Set Review's coming up. I'll see you for all of that. All right. Have a good one, folks.